Yeah, Dan, and as we've been discussing, crude prices are surging and could be set to rise further. That's according to analysts, with focus on the critical oil choke point of the Strait of Hormuz. According to Reuters, hundreds of tankers have dropped anchor in and around the strait following the strikes, with at least 3 damaged so far. And the Strait of Hormuz is a critical transit route linking major Gulf oil producers to the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman. According to data from Kepler, around 30 million barrels of oil per day moved through the strait last year. That's equal to roughly 31% of all seaborne oil flows. Now, I'm pleased to say Amrita Sen, founder and director of market intelligence at Energy Aspects, joins us now. So, Amrita, of course, we've been talking about the big moves that we're seeing in the oil market. Brent actually now up more than 7%, trading about $78 a barrel. First of all, your just initial assessment on how the energy markets are digesting this.
Like Dan was saying, look, we've seen the move above 80. We've kind of stabilized a little bit. I do think we will hold around that 80 level for some time right now, because while there hasn't been any direct hit to energy infrastructure on either side, and I think both sides have been conscious about that, the key is the strait, as you say. On our calculations, on our numbers, the number is actually higher. It's about 15 million barrels that went through the strait last year, about 80 million tons of LNG as well. And what you are seeing is people being extremely cautious. Just over the weekend, several ports have also been attacked and damaged. About 2.3 million barrels per day of liquids of load from those ports at different times have either been closed or they're not operating still. And I think that is the biggest issue right now. How do Asian refiners actually get the volumes from the Middle East? Oman and certain UAE grades can bypass it. Saudi Arabia has put through a massive contingency plan to move their oil through the East-West pipeline via the Red Sea. But I think the rest of it, even if you are able to move 5 million out through other methods, about 10 is still stuck. And right now, shippers are being super cautious in going in.
So, I mean, no ship, Iran's Revolutionary Guard advising that no ship passes through the strait. What is the risk that Iran actually formally shuts down the strait when we're talking about how vulnerable the Strait of Hormuz is right now?
We don't think that's very likely, because if Iran were to do that, then they also know that the US and Israel would, they just take that out very, very quickly. The US has way more superior military power to just, neutralize any of Iran's abilities to do that. And that's why I'm saying neither side has actually attacked energy infrastructure directly, because the stakes are just too high. But what you are seeing is there were 3 tankers attacked yesterday. And, those one-off, and this is something we've warned right throughout to our clients, is that while we're not saying that the straits are going to get closed, what the US will not be able to do is control these one-off attacks on tankers. And that is enough to kind of make the market extremely cautious about sending vessels in, and that's what creates the disruptions.
Amrita, Dan joining the conversation here, and good morning to you. First and foremost, how vulnerable is Gulf energy infrastructure right now? You mentioned that we haven't seen any direct impact so far, but of course that remains an option for the Iranians here as they seek to retaliate against these American and Israeli strikes.
Firstly, Dan, so good to see you, and I'm glad you're safe. And you look, in terms of the infrastructure, look, I'm hearing even reports right now, there are some refineries that have been hit, potentially in the kingdom. Of course, Oman, you saw yesterday with certain attacks at Duqm. Yes, there are these sporadic attacks, but in general, both Iran and generally the allies haven't really hit say Karg, for instance. There were some reports initially that Karg Island did get hit, but then we've got satellite tracking that shows actually that wasn't the case. So mostly it has been spared. Now, that's not to say that's going to remain the case going forward, but also equally, the kingdom's done so much to make sure that it has proper contingency plans around, for instance, not just oil and NGS production, but also its refineries. The same goes for UAE. And I think every country, Kuwait, everybody, high alert, but trying to make sure that they continue to supply their customers to the best of their abilities.
And Amrita, what are the scenarios that you and your teams are working on right now when it comes to the possibility of future Iranian supply. We're looking at real regime change inside Iran now. That could perhaps open the door longer term to Iranian barrels coming back online. At the same time, all eyes are on how China and India are going to respond as well. What's the link here?
Yeah, I mean, look, right now, the biggest thing we're working on is, of course, on the shipping side, delays on the straits, any kind of rerouting. What does that look like? You're talking about days and potentially millions of barrels, right, being stranded. All this oil and water could get absorbed as a result of that. But like you say, if you take a more medium-term view, we've always had those scenarios baked into our medium-term numbers that Iran does come back. The interesting thing, unlike, for instance, Venezuela, Iran has actually preserved a lot more of its upstream. 1.5 million barrels per day of its oil already goes to China, right? And you can see if let's say everything were to come good and Iran is able to attract investment very quickly, a few 100,000 barrels per day of production increase and export increase is very possible. From that 1.5 million barrels per day of exports, could they go to 1.82? Yes, over a couple of years, for instance. Anything much more than that will take a lot longer. But the biggest difference is that Iran is already putting most of its oil in the market into China, as opposed to some of the other countries who've been sanctioned, and you had seen them cut back on exports and production. I think the more interesting story is that if you do get regime change, currently Iranian oil flows at a significant discount into the Chinese independent refiners. That will no longer be the case. It can go back to Europe. Europe used to take about 600,000-700,000 barrels per day. India, like you mentioned, used to take a few 100,000 barrels per day of Iranian oil. Suddenly, China actually loses out those independents, and it becomes a much more equal market in terms of the trade flows.
And amid the oil market turmoil, 8 OPEC Plus producers have agreed to hike output by a modest 206,000 barrels per day in April. So, Amrita, back to you on this. Of course, this meeting over the weekend, OPEC Plus just increasing the output by a modest amount. But even if they raise the output, how much influence does OPEC Plus really have at this point? Because even if they increase the output by more, there's still the logistical challenges of getting it through the Strait. And also there's another issue of the production capacity of its members. Has that been maxed out?
Yeah, I mean, look, the logistical issues as we are facing right here, right now. But again, every country is doing absolutely everything it can. The flows are still continuing, right? There has been no disruption to kind of the base load flows when it comes to Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, at least the big ones we're talking about over here. And I think that's why it gives them confidence. And especially this is for April, remember? So by that time, the situation, fingers crossed for everybody, does kind of calm down. I think the bigger question you raise is spare capacity. And I think that's more prevalent or more relevant, I would say. Of the 206,000 barrels per day, which is about 1.5x, we only think 90 to 100,000 will actually even hit the market. Because right here, right now, it's mostly the GCC, and really we're talking Saudi Arabia that has the spare capacity to increase production. Russia is really struggling. So that headline number, I wouldn't really look at that. It's really what is available to increase, and you are mainly looking at Saudi Arabia and a little bit of UAE and Kuwait.
And Amrita, just very quickly before we go, President Trump has said that this could last 4 weeks. So in the worst case scenario, I mean, how high do you think oil prices could go if we see sustained fighting? We've seen some analysts calling for, $100 a barrel.
I think that would require some actual damage to energy infrastructure, and that you can't rule out, right? Because you have seen a lot of the Iranian factions kind of get mobilized as a result of that. So that's always the risk. I think right here, right now, we probably hold around 80, but further damage, and yes, we'll go up.
All right.